All right, back for more fun here with Goethe's Faust. I do want to mention John Dee, who is a kind of a Faust figure, and I've mentioned him before, is astonishingly in the news right now in the mainstream media. There's an article on CNN.com, on NationalGeographic.com, on Google News. So this article about him is floating around, and so I'm working on a Substack essay about that article and about its implications for me. So that's going to be my next Substack essay. I'm working on that. So just a quick advertisement for that. Any of you who want to subscribe to my Substack, when that essay hits, I'll probably publish it either tomorrow or Monday. So we're back with Faust, and I have been reading, I want to mention this, I've been reading through Rudiger Safransky's excellent biography of Goethe, and I'm about, a third of the way through it, I think, and I've been reading it along here. And it's a recent book of his. Rudiger Safransky has written a series of biographies on German philosophers, one on Nietzsche, one on Heidegger, one on Schopenhauer, and I think this one on Goethe, maybe the fourth. I don't think he has one on Hegel yet. But he's excellent, and I highly recommend him for anyone who is looking for a good biography of Goethe. This is a recent book. I think it just came out a year or two ago, and it reads like a novel. I just can't put it down. But I do want to point out that there's this period in Goethe's life early on when he himself, a lot of his characters are alter egos of his, such as Werther from The Sorrows of Young Werther, and Gertz von Berlichingen, even to a certain extent, is an alter ego. Faust definitely is. Goethe, in many ways, lived a kind of Faustian life. The grand lines of his life are very similar to the story of Faust. When he was 26, this is in 1775, he received an invitation from Duke Karl August of Weimar, which at that point was a tiny little provincial town of no significance or import. And he was invited to move there by the Duke, who was a relative of Frederick the Great's. And he took him up on the offer. And this marks an important shift as Goethe moves from Frankfurt, where he was born, Frankfurt am Main, where he was born, and has led his life primarily as a man of the word, reading book after book after book. And already with The Sorrows of Young Werther, we can see him beginning to become a bit skeptical about these books and how much there might be a point, Werther suggests, where reading may not be such a good thing if it isn't grounded by experience, because Werther has no experience. And he's one of these individuals like Madame Bovary or Don Quixote who has been ruined by reading and has a misapperception of reality as a result. And I think Goethe, that text marked the beginning of Goethe's disillusionment with living life just straight out of books. Books are absolutely necessary, but those who fall prey to this idea that books are all that you need, that's totally wrong, and I agree with Goethe about this, that life experience is essential. So he was already sort of ready for a shift, and boy did he get it. When he moved to Weimar, he's 26 years old. Now Duke August was only 18 years old, and the other nobles were unsure of him, this upstart guy, and the dude was crazy. He was totally crazy. And he dragged Goethe along from one adventure to the next, and their relationship is very similar to the relationship between Faust and Mephistopheles. Duke Karl August was his Mephistopheles. He was in possession of all this power, and he was going through the women, and Goethe got some of that action. So I think for the first time in his life, because he'd been flirting mostly with unavailable women, usually his friends' fiancées, like Herder's fiancée was flirting with, or married women like Lotta in Wetzlar, who had become the primary inspiration for the Lotta in Werther, Sorrows of Young Werther. And so now they're just running around Weimar making asses out of themselves, these two. The other nobility are like, well, this is not becoming conduct of a duke. And who's this Goethe guy? And Goethe was having a corruptive influence on him. And they were just running around partying, drinking, getting drunk, seducing the ladies. I think this may have been a period of promiscuity for Goethe, especially with Anna Amelia. And he was also flirting with another Charlotte von Stein, in this case, who was a married woman. And he was flirting with her via letters, correspondence, and also a woman named Corona Schroeder, whom he cast as Iphigenia in his play Iphigenia in Taurus, which was written when he was about 30. And so these were the roaring 20s, these late 20s for Goethe, where he was having a blast and upsetting all the nobles in Weimar. And then there's a period where then as Saturn starts to return, which it does for everyone at 28, it takes 28 years to go around the sun, and its transit lasts for about 2 years. No one is the same after their Saturn return. It matures you and changes you. You move from 20s, which is the decade of playtime, to your 30s, which is a period when playtime is over. You have to get serious about your life and your career and what you're going to do. And you can see this happening with Goethe. It announces, in his case, I think his Saturn return was very difficult. Not everyone's is. Mine wasn't, for instance, but his was. And it began with the death of his beloved sister Cornelia. The two of them had an almost incestuous love for each other. He was very jealous when she went and got married. She was always jealous whenever Goethe was flirting with other women. And they loved each other so much that when Cornelia left and was married to this guy Schlosser, Goethe didn't see her anymore. She just fell into a deep depression from which she never recovered, and then died in childbirth in 1777. So Goethe's 28 at this point, I believe. His Saturn return begins with her death. And it causes him so much grief that after a few months have gone by, and he's calmed down. He's not running around with the Duke anymore, causing chaos and mischief. Now he's sobering up, and he's beginning to realize that this is a very serious situation. So what he does is, the Duke wants him to reopen a copper mine in Ilmenau, the Ilmenau copper mine. So he decides to take a trip to the Harz Mountains, but he does so in a way that is extremely reckless and very dangerous. There is a possibly suicidal dimension to this, because you don't climb the Brocken in the Harz Mountains in November with a snowstorm, which is what he did. He got in I think it was a horse, and went up, found a guide, and a guy was like, "No, I've never even climbed the mountain, but I'll take you." So they went up in a snowstorm. And Goethe, in a sense, was defying fate and the gods, because he figured, if I survive this and come back, then that means fate is on my side, and I'm meant to be here in Weimar doing what I'm doing as now a political man. And he did survive. He went up to the Brocken, got an incredible view, then came down. And as he was coming down, he noticed all these incredible colors everywhere with the sun setting and all this amazing stuff. And so a couple of things happen here. The seeds are laid for his interest in science at this point, because in 1784 he writes one of his first scientific essays on granite. And so this begins to shift him into the realm of mineralogy, especially dealing with the copper mine, Ilmenau. And it starts moving him into that world, and also into scientific studies, and then with all the colors, eventually the seeds are sown here for his theory of colors in 1810. So he comes down from the mountain, what will be the Magic Mountain in the Walpurgisnacht sequence at the climax here of Faust Part 1, with the seeds that have been sown for his later career. And so Goethe, after his Saturn return, is a matured man. He's a very, very different man. He's no longer a kind of a silly guy. Okay, so let's get back to this story. Now, I do want to point out that Faust Part 1 is divided into two halves. Just like the epic as a whole has two parts, Part 1 and Part 2. We're at the halfway point here, where if you look at the lengths, the respective lengths from this point on, which is the section that's called Street on page 71, which begins the Gretchen tragedy, which occupies the rest of the story of Part 1. It is about halfway. If you look at the lengths leading up to it, after Auerbach and the Witch's Kitchen, it's about halfway. Okay, so here we have a painting that is painted where this captures a moment that actually Goethe didn't write. The footnote at the bottom says that, as indicated in a draft, Goethe originally intended Gretchen to appear at the end of a procession coming from the cathedral. And so this artist here has painted that moment. Just as she's coming out of a cathedral. She's Catholic. She's coming out of a cathedral, and then there's Mephisto dressed in red in the background. And then Faust is offering her his arm. And it begins, Faust, Margareta walking past. Faust says to her, "My fair young lady, may I make free to offer you my arm and company?" And of course here you can tell he's 30 years younger. And in the play by Peter Stein on YouTube, they cast a young man in this role, not Bruno Ganz, who has been playing him up to this point. And she says, "I'm neither fair nor lady, pray, can unescorted find my way." So she shrugs him off. But as we learn in the next scene, when she's alone in her bedroom, she did find him handsome, and she's thinking about him, fantasizing a little bit. That guy was pretty good looking, and he was coming on to me. And she's a woman of low birth. She doesn't have really much to offer except her looks, and she's only 16. And then Faust says, "God, what a lovely child. I swear I've never seen the like of her. She's so dutiful and pure, yet not without a pert allure. Her rosy lip, her cheek aglow, I shall never forget, I know. Her glance's timid downward dart is graven deeply in my heart. But how she was so short with me, that was consummate ecstasy." And so her rejection of him actually inflames him. Now he wants her even more. And then so he turns back to Mephistopheles and says, "Here, get me that young wench, for certain." Mephistopheles, "Which one?" Faust, "Well, the one that just walked past." Mephistopheles, "Her? I just happened by the curtain at her confession. She's just been pronounced absolved of any sin. She's a right innocent young lass who brought mere nothings to confess. On her I have no hold at all." Faust says, "Well, she's over 14 after all." Apparently the standards for having intercourse with young women had a very different age than our 18. Interesting. "You're like a loose Lothario," Mephistopheles says, "who thinks that all dear blossoms blow for him, can see no honest name, nor favor that is not fair game. It does not always work, I fear." Faust says, "Your pious worship, spare my ear. Your wise proprieties and charters. Let me be plain, and hear me right. Unless I have that sweet delight nestling in my embrace tonight, the selfsame midnight hour will part us." Mephistopheles, "Come, think what can be and what can't. A fortnight even will be scant to spy out chances. Scheme ahead." Faust, "If I were granted 7 hours, I should not need the devil's powers to lure a fledgling to my bed." Mephistopheles, "That sounded like a Frenchman's boast. Don't wolf your pleasures like a glutton who would gulp down a quail like mutton." And so the point of the scene is that Mephistopheles agrees. And he says, and Faust says, "Well, give her some sort of trinket to at least act as bait to lure her interest to me." And then so in the next scene, we go into Gretchen's room. And here's Georg Kirsting's sketch of her. And she has her trademark spinning wheel at her side there off to the left as she is thinking about Faust and sort of talking to herself in the mirror. And then Faust and Mephistopheles have snuck into her room and caught a glimpse of it. And Faust sentimentalizes it. And Mephistopheles has brought in a jewelry box with lots of jewels in it. And they hide it in her cupboard. And here's another, this is also Kirsting, which is a painting of a woman in the exact same pose and posture of Gretchen, even though I think it's a non-specific individual. But I like the painting quite a bit better. It does capture the essence of Gretchen here as she's alone. And she sings this little song about the King of Thule, which is important thematically. She says, "There was a king in Thule, right faithful unto death, whom she who loved him truly gave a cup with her dying breath. Not dearer in his keeping, he drained it at every sup, and never could help weeping each time he raised his cup. And when it came to dying, his city's all he told, not to his heir denying, save for the cup of gold. He held a banquet royal in his sea-girt castle tall, filled with his vassals loyal, the high ancestral hall. There stood the hoary drinker, and sipped of life's last glow, then flung the holy trinket into the brine below. He saw it plunging, winking, and sinking deep at sea. His lids grew heavy, sinking, no other drop drank he." And so now note that this little story of the king, Thule was thought to be a Hyperborean land to the north, at the farthest northern edge of the earth in the medieval time. And here this king has his mistress, not his wife, but his paramour. His mistress has given him this goblet as she dies, so he keeps her memory alive by drinking from the goblet. And then finally, when it comes time for him to die, he's hung on to the goblet for the whole time, and then he throws it into the sea. And so this is, as Edward Edinger points out, the Jungian, in his analysis of this, it's a failed conjunctio. So the conjunctio in alchemy is the marriage of opposites, of the king and the queen in alchemy. And it's one of Jung's main themes, the conjunctio. And it's a failed conjunctio. so that it forecasts and tells the reader that the relationship between Gretchen and Faust is also a failed attempt at unifying the opposites. It's a failed conjunctio as well. And the cup, of course, is an echo of the poison cup that Faust started out with at the beginning before the Easter bells rang. So he was going to drink that poison from that cup. And then we saw the wine pouring into cups in the Auerbach's cellar, and then in Witch's kitchen, the witch has to change the poison in her cup to an elixir of life, which Faust then drinks, which makes him 30 years younger. And so the cup refers to that. The cup is an image of potential wholeness because it's round, so it becomes, but it also refers to a feminine valency. The container is always female, image of the self. But it also refers to the story, it's going to be a failure of an attempt at unifying opposites. And then later in the text, when Gretchen is in the church, and after she's been impregnated and she knows that she's in for a rough ride here because Faust has abandoned her, and there's a last judgment, a chorus singing about the last judgment in the background. And Edinger points out that, so this identifies Gretchen's personal situation of the failure to unify opposites with her and Faust with that of the collective Christian eon, the Pisces eon, which has failed to unify a whole series of opposites, that between Christ and Satan, for instance, spirit and nature, heaven and hell. Christianity has this fundamental schism in it, which has not been healed, and gets carried all the way down to the Last Judgment, where it still doesn't get successfully united, where we have the damned who are separated out and go in one direction, and the blessed and the saved who are separated out and go in another direction. So even with the Last Judgment, there's a failure to unify the cosmic opposites, and so Christianity is stuck here with a major schism that the Gretchen-Faust story are replaying in miniature, in microcosm. And then so at the end of the scene, Gretchen does find in her cabinet the jewels, a box full of jewels. And in the next scene, we see a walk with Mephistopheles and Faust, where Mephistopheles informs him he's consternated, and he says, well, you know what happened was that the girl saw the jewels, and she was afraid to keep them, so she gave them to her mother, and then her mother goes and gives it to a priest, a Catholic priest, who then pocketed all the loot and walked away with it. So Faust says, well, give her another one. Looks like it spurred her interest, so let's concoct another one. And so he does. And then so in this painting here, we see Gretchen now and her neighbor Marta. So Marta is an older woman who we never see her mother, although her mother is killed. Actually, almost her whole family is killed as the result of Faust's desire just to have sex with her. She dies. She murders and drowns her infant, just as the King of Thule threw away his cup into the ocean. She throws her infant into the river. She dies. The kid dies. They give poison as a sleeping potion to her mother so Faust can have sex with her. The mother dies because the sleeping potion is too strong. And then Faust has to duel with her brother Valentine, who's fighting for her honor, and he kills him. So almost her whole family is wiped out as the result here of Faust's amoral lust. And so here she is. This is the beginnings then of her corruption now, because now she's got another jewel box, and she brings over her neighbor Marta, and she says, here, there's another box of jewels. And Marta says, be quiet about it to your mother, because she'll just give it to the church. You can come over and we can dress you in these jewels. It's beautiful. So now she's advised to lie to her mother, and she's keeping ill-gotten gains. So now she's beginning, this is the beginnings of her fall, her slow, gradual corruption, scene by scene, as Faust and Mephistopheles corrupt her. And so Marta is the classic 18th century bourgeois drama, busybody poking her nose in where it doesn't belong. She's the sort of matchmaker between Gretchen and Faust. And so just as and you can see Faust and Mephistopheles here off to the left spying on them. And so there's this wonderful scene that I want to conclude here by reading, when they decide to, Mephistopheles then goes to pay Marta a visit. And Marta is there with Gretchen, Margareta, and here he is coming in. And I want to read the scene because I think it's absolutely hilarious. This is called The Neighbor's House. And so Marta now, it opens with her alone. God pardon my husband if he can. He has done ill by me, dear man. Left for the wide world just like that, and me a grass widow on the mat. Yet never did I grieve him or oppose, but loved him tenderly, God knows. And she starts crying. For all I know, he's dead. Oh, grief. Had I at least a coroner's brief. Margareta enters. Frau Marta. Gretchen, what, my pet? My knees are shaking, I declare. I've found another casket there of ebony in my cabinet and full of jewels, star on star, more precious than the first by far. You must keep mum about it to your mother. She'd take it to confession like the other. Just look and see. Oh, just look here. Marta does her up with the jewelry. Aren't you the luckiest girl, my dear? Margareta. Just that I dare not wear it in the street, nor yet at church be seen in it. So she has to lie now about all this. Marta. Come over oftener. Don't look sour, and give the things a secret try. Parade before the mirror for an hour, and we'll enjoy them on the sly. On some occasion, then, a feast or such, we'll show them one by one, so folk won't notice much. The chain we'll keep a while. We'll try an earbob first. Your mom may never see. We'll hoodwink her at worst. Margareta. Whoever left these chests for me to find? Here's something quite uncanny to my mind. Then a knock at the door. Mephistopheles enters. Could this be Mother? Oh, my sin. Marta peering through the little curtain. It's a strange gentleman. Come in. Enter Mephistopheles. I step straight in. My forthright venture, I hope the ladies will not censure. Respectfully steps back before Margareta. It's for Frau Marta Schwertlein, I inquire. I'm she, sir. What is your desire? Under his breath to her, he says, I know you now. That is enough for me. I see you have distinguished company. I took a liberty. Excuse me, pray. I'll wait till later in the day. Marta says aloud, God help us, child, by all that's human. He takes you for a gentlewoman. Margareta. I'm nothing but a poor young maid. My lord's too kind. I'm afraid these gems and chains are not my own. Mephistopheles. Oh, it is not the gems alone. And notice he refers to them as in a knowing manner. He's not saying, what are you talking about? He says, oh, it's not just the gems. You have a way, a look so distingue. How glad I am that I may stay. Marta. You bring... I'm eager, you'll excuse. Mephistopheles. I wish I had more cheerful news. Please not to blame it on your guest. Your husband's dead, and sends his best. So now, as far as she's concerned, now she knows for sure her husband is dead, who had left her. But of course, one begins to suspect that as Mephistopheles plays her here, that he's lying. He doesn't really know what's happened to her husband. Marta, she says, he's dead? The faithful heart? Oh no, my husband dead. I won't survive the blow. Margareta, my poor dear madam, don't despair. Mephistopheles, let me relate the sad affair. Margareta, God spare me loving at its cost. I could not bear it if I lost. That's a foreshadowing of her terrible fate. Mephistopheles, joy must with grief, and grief with joy be stirred. Marta, recount me how his passing came. Mephistopheles, he lies at Padua, interred of St. Antonius fame, and St. Antonius is the patron saint of women in love. Upon a gravesite duly blessed, bedded for cool eternal rest. Marta, and have you nothing more along from him? She's wondering if he has brought anything that her husband gave to him to give to her as an heirloom or perhaps a box of jewels. Mephistopheles, oh yes, a large and grave request. Be sure to have 300 masses sung for him. My pocket's empty for the rest. What? Not a gift, a prize to cheer the heart with? What any journeyman saves in his satchel's deeps to carry home for keeps, would sooner beg or starve than part with? Mephistopheles, madam, your troubles truly grieve me. He did not waste his substance, though, he swore. He rued his errors much, believe me, oh yes, and his ill fortune even more. Margareta, alas, that people are so sorely tried. Again, another foreshadowing. Sure, many a requiem for him, I'll pray. Mephistopheles, you're worthy to be married any day. You are an amiable child. Margareta, oh no, that won't be soon, for sure. She's right about that. Mephistopheles, well, if not husband, then a paramour. So he advises her, if you don't get married, then you just go have sex with some guy. It's bliss of heaven's highest grace to cradle such in one's embrace. Margareta, that's not the custom with us, sir. Mephistopheles, oh, custom or no, it will occur. Marta, do tell. Mephistopheles, I stood beside his bed at his last breath. It was of something better than manure, half-rotten straw, and yet he died a Christian death, and mourned his dying more in debt than merely poor. Alas, he cried, With what self-hate it fills me, thus to forsake my calling, thus my wife. Ah, it's this consciousness that kills me. Had I but her forgiveness in this life? Marta crying, the poor dear man, I've long forgiven him. Mephistopheles, resuming with the dead husband. But she, God knows, was more to blame than I. He gives her, so he's tormenting her. The dying husband's last words were that he blames Marta for everything. Marta, he lied, with one foot in the grave, to lie, Mephistopheles. He doubtless raved in a delirious dream, or I'm no judge at all, a dying trance. There was, he said, no idling for a second to get first children, and then bread for her, bread reckoned in the most all-inclusive sense, and I could never eat my share in peace, what's more. Marta, oh, could he so forget all love, all vows he swore, the drudgery by day and night? No, he was warmly mindful of your plight, said, as I sailed from Malta on my trip, I prayed for wife and child with fervor rare, and heaven duly heard my prayer, in that our vessel caught a Turkish ship which bore a cargo of the Sultan's treasure. Then valor reaped its just reward, and I received my well-earned measure out of the Ottoman horde. Marta goes, oh yes? Oh, where? Perhaps he buried it. So Mephistopheles says he, on his voyage to Malta, captured a treasure hoard from the Sultan's ship, and but yet she's got nothing from it. He shows up empty-handed. He's really tormenting her, and later in the next couple of scenes, he'll try to convince her that he's interested in her and flirting with her, which, of course, she's not at all. Who knows where the four winds have carried it, Mephistopheles says. A fine young Neapolitan, which is a prostitute, took pity on him, astray in a strange city. She proved to him a dear and faithful friend, of which he felt the blessings to the end, which is an ironic reference, the footnote says, to syphilis. Marta, that thief, defrauder of his child and wife, that neither grief nor misery could wean him from his shameful life. Mephistopheles, well, now he's dead for it, you see. If I were in your place, I'd mourn him for a decorous year, meanwhile discreetly look for some new face. The kind my first was, oh dear, I'd not find easily another such. There never was more winsome scamp than mine. He only liked the roving life too much, and foreign women, and foreign wine, and those confounded dice. He was a great husband, in other words, despite the fact that he was fucking other women, gambling, and drinking. I'll never find a guy like that again. Mephistopheles goes, well, tit for tat and give and take. If he made light of for your sake an equal pinch of harmless vice, I swear were this proviso true, I might myself change rings with you. And he's totally bullshitting her. Marta, oh wow, my lord is pleased to jest. Mephistopheles, aside to the audience, I'd best be off before this gets absurd. She'd hold the very devil to his word. To Gretchen, where lies your own heart's interest? Margareta, what is your meaning, sir? Mephistopheles aside, dear artless innocence, you. Aloud, good ladies, my farewell. Margareta, farewell. Marta, before you go, I should be thankful for a witness, where, how, and when my spouse found rest eternal. I've always liked propriety and fitness, would want to read his passing in the journal. Mephistopheles, he says, oh, I know just the guy who could also be a witness. Yes, ma'am. By what two witnesses attest, truth's always rendered manifest. I have a mate of quite superior sort that I can call upon before your court. I'll bring him here. Be sure you do. And Mephistopheles says, and will our miss be present too? A gallant lad, been everywhere, speaks all young ladies, passing fair. Margareta, now I'd have to blush for my low birth. Mephistopheles, before no sovereign on earth. Marta, behind the house there in my garden then. Tonight we shall await the gentleman. And then so I'll stop here with this street. There's a brief street scene where Faust and Mephistopheles then confer, and Mephistopheles reports back to him about the encounter and says, I've set things up for you and Gretchen. You're going to pretend to be a witness of the death of Marta's husband. She just wants a second opinion to confirm it. So you come along with us in the garden, and I'll stroll with Marta, you stroll with Gretchen, and then you can work your magic from that point on. So now he's roping Faust into a lie. But Faust is, of course, willing to do it. All right, we'll stop there. In the next scene, we'll return to the garden behind Marta's house.